I lived in Boston for about 10 years of my life, in my 30s, a little bit in my 20s too. And I never found a parish there that felt as good to me as my parish here in Albany. I found beautiful churches. I listened to great choirs in Boston. I met some really talented priests and pastoral leaders. But it never quite felt the same. So I was talking to a friend of mine in Boston. We were bonded because we were both expats from upstate New York. We were living in Boston, but both of us had roots back here. And she had grown up in Albany. Her name is Sandy Elam, now Malinsky. The Elams grew up not far from here. So one time we were talking about our plans for the weekend, and it turned out that we were both going home to Albany for the weekend. And I said, "Oh, Sandy, you've got to come to church with me. You've got to come to my parish. You won't believe it. It's so good. Come to St. Vincent de Paul," I said. "The music is incredible. And the preaching is so good. They get great preachers. And wait till you see how diverse it is. For a Catholic church, everybody's there. It's great. You're going to love it." And she said, "That sounds great, but I will never go there." And I said, "Why not?" She said, "Well, it sounds like your parish has everything, except Father Noone." And that's a deal breaker for me. And I had never met Father Noone at that time in my life, and I thought, "Oh, what do you mean, Father Noone? Who is this?" Well, since then, he's become one of my dearest, one of my best mentors. And I remember in one of the conversations that I had with him in our 20-year friendship, we were talking about an editorial that had been in the Daily Vatican newspaper about priests. And I don't remember who brought the article to whom. It might have been that he brought it up, or maybe I saw it and I wanted to call him and tell him. But the editorial said, what people need in their priests is people who are experts in being human, who know what it is to be human, inside out. They know all about it, while at the same time are in love with God. That's what people need. The exact wording was, they need to be experts in the human condition who are also contemplatives in love with God. And we talked about how beautiful and clear a goal that was, how clear that need that people have is. This past week, I had the very sad duty at my parish at St. Mary's in Glens Falls of announcing that Father David Noone had died previously, the week before, and I had no idea what would happen next. At the end of that Mass, when I was at the door, there was a long line of people who hadn't seen Father Noone since he left Hudson Falls, his first assignment, back in 1975, the year I was born. Out of curiosity, how many people here are from Hudson Falls? Thank you. He left there 50 years ago. But what I heard at the door were these stories, exact stories. "I haven't seen him in 50 years, one woman said. The last time I saw him, I was 19. And my father was dying at Glens Falls Hospital. He had just had a heart attack, and my 12-year-old brother and I were there. And Father knew." Somebody else said, some people might remember this, "I was at the Hudson Falls High School basketball game with Father Noone in 1974 when someone ran in and said, 'St. Paul's Church is on fire.' He was there." Somebody said, "Our kids' favorite memories, even now, in their 60s, are from when they were growing up and Father Noone would come over for an occasional Sunday supper." And I think the reason we're hearing people speak that way about somebody they haven't seen in 50 years is because he was passionate about pointing out for people where God was in any situation. He wanted to see where God's footprints were, where the breadcrumbs were that were left. He wanted to make sure that people left church feeling closer to God. And the way you do that, according to that beautiful editorial, was you have to know what it's like to bear unbearable sorrow, to fight unbeatable foes, to try when your arms are too weary, to quote the song. And he knew about that. The better you knew him, the more you knew how well he knew about that. Many people, perhaps, because of his resilient, affable, funny, smart, cool ways, thought that he kind of just sailed through life. But those who knew him better knew nothing could be farther from the truth. He knew sorrow and struggle and weariness. And his secret was, in the midst of all of it, he was always on the lookout for God and God's presence in that. A lot of people in Hudson Falls knew him as one of their very favorite priests who somehow disarmed Monsignor Kiffin. And they became great friends. But what they didn't know is that he came to that first assignment with some really hard wounds. Something really hard had happened right before he arrived. He had been in a meeting with his spiritual director, and he assumed that the meeting was about preparing spiritually for his ordination, which was about to happen in a month. Because he studied in Rome back in the days when you went on the ship, the Leonardo da Vinci, one way, and 5 years later came back on another ship in reverse, he hadn't seen his family, had literally not seen his family in 4 years. And he had never been able to make a phone call because of how high the demand was on the limited transatlantic cable spaces at that time. So he resorted to sending tapes overseas so his parents could hear his stories on tape. That's how they wound up communicating all those years. So now, a month away from this ordination, he's sitting with his spiritual director, a priest, who said to him shocking words. He said, "David, I don't think you should seek ordination. I don't think you have what it takes to be a priest. I think you're too much of a nonconformist. You don't color in the lines. And you're not going to like it. Priesthood is very rigorous, and you're not going to like it, and you're going to be uncomfortable. And people are going to notice that you're not conforming enough, and they're going to be uncomfortable." So he went on a journey of feeling for years like, what if he's right? What if God didn't call me to this? What if I'm a fraud? He had the courage to ask those questions, but they brought him low. They were hard questions. And so he had to live this calling that he felt deep in his heart that he had, while at the same time, all the time, having this nagging doubt that perhaps God didn't want him. So he was always on the lookout for the footsteps of God in the midst of that journey, for the breadcrumbs. He was always looking out for where God might be in that. So God's presence came in the form of an oddball in the parish named Kathy. Don't know her last name. But people in Hudson Falls apparently knew her because she was one of the town characters. And 9 months of the year, she would wear wooden clogs. And she would clip-clop all through the church. But she had a habit of coming to Mass 5 minutes late. So she'd clip-clop halfway up the aisle. Her favorite pew was the front pew. But then she'd remember, I forgot to bless myself with holy water. So she'd clip-clop back to the back of the church to get her holy water. And then she'd clip-clop all the way up. And he was like, I'm going to lose it. He knew that people rolled their eyes at Kathy. And yet he noticed just how joyful she was. She's so joyful. And at first she thought, well, maybe she's one of God's simple ones who doesn't realize how rejected she is by this community. But he got to know her a bit better and realized there was some depth there. And so he asked her, Kathy, you don't always have it easy. How do you do it? What gets you up in the morning? What keeps that smile on your face? And she said, Romans 8. Romans 8. That's what she said. She said, I'm convinced by that. Nothing can separate me from the love of God. Nothing. Distress? Mm-mm. Anguish? No. Death? Pfft. Present things? Future things? Anything? No. That conversation happened maybe back, we don't know, 1973. He chose it for the second reading today. Anne read it so beautifully. Nothing can separate us. He clung to that. He felt that God had delivered a message to him. And that's not the only one. That's certainly not the only time. And actually, he's got an even better story of that, but it'll be lunch soon. Stories of grace, like the story about Kathy, that's what he loved. He loved hearing them. He loved collecting them. He loved sharing them with other people. He could not think of a better way to use the homily time than to collect these golden nuggets of stories of grace and give them to the people. And the more local the story, the more useful it was. How is God at work in Colony? What breadcrumbs have been found in Loudonville lately? How has God's presence shown up in this week in our lives? He said something that I'll never forget once. We were talking about the homily and how important it is and what a burden it can be, and how you always have a term paper. A lot of us priests are in churches where we have daily mass most of the week, so we basically have a term paper due every night for the next day. And so we were talking about that, and he said, you know what the problem is? He goes, you know how when Americans go overseas, if they haven't studied any other languages, they sometimes, in their desire to connect, start just speaking English loudly and slowly, hoping people will understand. Where is the bathroom, they say. And the people in Japan are looking at them like, those loud syllables do not help me. He said, I find that that's what preaching sometimes becomes. They're saying theology to us loudly and slowly. So do you get it now? And he said, but people only know the language they speak. If that's not their language, you can make it as loud and as slow as you want. You can be as deliberate as you want. He said, but people only speak the languages they speak. So he said, if a priest can't translate this story into the language of the people of Christ our light, then they might as well save their breath. Doesn't that sound like him? He was someone who spoke the local language. And he spoke it wherever he went. Looking back over his life, he was kind of a missionary of sorts. How many diocesan priests do what he did? Parish priests who spent 4 years as a hall rector in Notre Dame. How many parish priests were also a hospital chaplain in New Zealand? How many parish priests learned to speak the local language to college students and to people around the world who were in crisis? And those places fed him. He would say that Notre Dame was the most transformative time of his life. Those of you who've heard him talk about that know that. And it was not lost on us that the hall that he was sent to be the rector of was Grace Hall. Since he was always looking for grace in every moment, how perfect for the rector to be at Grace Hall. New Zealand, he thought, was the most beautiful place on earth. But of all the places, Christ our light. 27 years. He never planned it. He didn't plan that far ahead. He was an innovator and an adventurer. He didn't know that he would spend 27 years here. But I remember the first time I came here because I wanted to check out what my friend Sandy from Boston, the expat from Christ Our Light, was talking about. Who is this guy? How good could this mass be? So I remember the first time I walked in. And the first thing that happened is an altar server handed me a sheet of paper with 3 pictures on it that didn't look related to me. I don't remember what they were, but they were preparation for the homily. He was going to talk about those images in the homily, so he had prepared ahead of time by having these handouts. Do people here remember the handouts? Do you remember that if you came in on Memorial Day, you were likely to get an index card with the name of a soldier who died serving their country, and that it would have a little biography where they were born, where they died, and he would ask you to pray for them during the week of Memorial Day. Do you remember ever coming in at a Sunday of Lent and getting a smooth stone from a pond? Do you remember that? That was a Lent, and every week was a different stone that represented a different virtue, a different theme of Lent. It's no mistake that the people of Christ Our Light have grown so much spiritually over the years, right? That affects people. That makes a difference in people's lives. He wasn't reading out of some manual of what you should do to make your parish vibrant. He was trying things. He was throwing linguine at the wall, and some of it would stick, and some of it wouldn't. Do you remember before the renovation that there was a giant screen here? Some people hated it, but they loved what it did because it was this amazing way to bring images. And for Americans, the local language is images. People do way better with images than they do with long lectures. We know that. Teachers know that. And so now it's even better. I walked in and my heart leapt when I saw the images on the wall. That's all from Innovation that he brought because he wanted the breadcrumbs to be evident. He wanted the footsteps to be visible. He wanted people to experience the grace. And he couldn't think of anything better that could happen for people who gather for the Eucharist than to leave fed in many ways. Another thing that happened at that first Mass I came to that I didn't understand was after the gospel, all of a sudden 2 altar servers brought chairs on the platform. And Kay Connolly came up. Is Kay here today? Kay Connolly came up and he interviewed her. And he said, Kay, you spend a lot of time in our Eucharistic chapel. Can you talk to us about how that's affected your life for the better? How has praying with the Eucharist helped you? And she gave him this wonderful response, 3 different ways that it was helping her life. I'll never forget that. That's what he did all the time. He was always using that to help people, to speak their language. And I think that's what my friend Sandy was saying. She said, your parish sounds wonderful, but I don't like subtitles. I want to hear it in my language. And that's what I think happened for 27 years here at this parish. If you were like me, you thought he'd never retire. No way. I was like, when I heard he was going to retire, I was like, fat chance, you'll be back. You love this. But he told the story of why he decided to retire. He felt like God actually interrupted his plans to tell him. And it was in the form of a story of a mother in this parish who was teaching her children about stewardship. So the mother told him, Father Noone, you're going to love this. She said, I always give my daughter $1 before Mass, and I tell her that's for the collection. And so I'm trying to teach her about stewardship. So one day, I gave my daughter the $1, and she looked at it, and she tugged at me and said, Mommy, why is Father Noone on the $1 bill? And she told him that story. She goes, isn't that a riot? And he said, I'm going to retire now. That was how he made the decision. But you can't retire if you're David Noone. He looked around for where retirement might happen. Maybe Arizona. He thought he went to Arizona to check it out. And he did what Father Noone would do. He went incognito to every parish. And to some non-Catholic parishes. He'd wear a baseball cap. He'd wear a Notre Dame t-shirt. And he'd go and he'd join the men's group. He'd go to a Bible study. He'd volunteer to do something. And he learned that there were many different ways that Catholic parishes live this faith. And he took golden nuggets for his satchel in all those places. In the end, he decided to go to North Carolina. He made a deep friendship with Dr. Hideki Maruka, who was studying for his PhD at UAlbany back in the days when Father Dave was here. And when he was retiring, Dr. Hideki had a position down at a university in North Carolina in Fayetteville. And that felt like that might be a good spot. So off he went to a new place in the country that he'd never been. And he did exactly what he did everywhere else. Joined the local places, learned what Fort Bragg was like, went and visited all the different parishes, helped out tons when he could. And I think that's where his real missionary spirit started to show up the most. We're so grateful that Father Bill Martin is here from Unbound. Unbound is something that he absolutely loved. I asked him once, what made you decide in your retirement to preach for Unbound? Because it really was anybody who has experienced Unbound, which brings projects, sponsorships of elders and youth in developing countries around the world, 17 different countries. It allows people in places like Loudonville to support people in places like Bolivia, where I have a sponsored child in Unbound because of Father Noone. And I said, what made you decide that that was where you were going to put your energy? And he said, I went to a conference and Unbound said, we begin where the paved road ends. Where the paved road ends, we begin there. And he goes, these are my people. That's Father Noone. He begins where the paved road ends. And of course, he'd already experienced that because only God's grace could bring a young Haitian man, Pierre-Louis, who had been devastated by the 2010 earthquake, to a scholarship position studying at Siena College, only because he was being hosted by a family at Christ Our Light did he get to tell his story to Father Noone. And Friends of Fontaine has grown to be such an important thing. And the way that Father Noone would talk about Friends of Fontaine, I would want to call him and complain about diocesan politics or something. And he would say, do you know that we just figured out how to strengthen the cement in the walls of a reservoir of drinking water? He's like, I just can't believe it. He goes, this local engineer just figured it out. He went down there, and now he's going to go all over Haiti helping them not have their reservoirs collapse. And I just loved that, right? He was a priest who loved this faith, but he didn't try to separate it into sacred things and unsacred things. He didn't believe that there was profane things. He thought, God made it all. It's all sacred. As long as we don't desecrate it, it's sacred. And so he cared as much about incense and holy water as he did about concrete and drinking water. Those were things that were other revelations of God to our people. I think you read his obit. I bet you loved it. We all did. Did you catch that he said, don't send flowers? No, they'll just die. He said, instead, take time to notice grace at work in your life and be kind to the people around you. And he said, if you think of it, gather to pray that I've made it safely home. So here we are. We're not expected to fill his shoes, just to follow on the path that he was walking on. So he said, I'm going to try to leave behind more faith than doubt, more laughter than tears, more love than regret. Well done, Father David Noone.